Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads today, Friday, September 30th, episode 122. This is a really exciting day for me. Why is that, you say? Because fall is here? No, although after a couple of days of fall, I have to admit that I like it more than I did when it first went to 50 degrees and I thought it was below freezing. But other than that, it's a really exciting day because today really marks a turning point for MedTech Crossroads. See, when we got started as COVID Connect over 2 years ago, it was because we at Into Being thought, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to all this stuff? How can we help our community coming together with others in the community to try to respond to all these emergent things? Well, over time, as COVID has diminished, that particular need has gone away. But one of the things in talking with many of you that we've realized is that you love to get FDA news. You love to know the events that are coming up. And you love to have a perspective on them that comes from somebody who's embedded in that system, who's embedded in that community, who's working in these areas. And that's our team and that's our friends. That is this community that we thrive in the middle of. And so one of the things that we're doing, and we're going to be doing every week from here on out on MedTech Crossroads, many times we've brought FDA news to you, almost like it was a special item. But remember back at the beginning of COVID Connect when we were bringing FDA news because everything was breaking? Well, it's not all as critical as it was at the beginning of COVID. But there's a lot pouring out of the agency, pouring out of the industry. And right now, everyone's moving back to in-person meetings. So we're going to get those in-person events happening. We were just at one 2 weeks ago with the MISH-Bio Medical Device Summit. We're going to tell you in just a moment about a whole bunch. I mean, I can't even imagine. Someone at that summit said, wow, if there could be an event every day of the week, we would have finally caught up in Michigan with the coasts. We may be getting close. I don't know. We're going to be telling you it must be 20 different events coming up in the next 2 months. Many of them are local, happening in the ecosystem. We'll continue to add to that list. We're also each week now down selecting from must be hundreds of news items. We get these from FDA feeds and industry feeds, but we're doing it in a very interesting way. At Into Being here, we're talking with our project managers who are day in and day out working on medical device development projects. They're working with the agency. They're working with manufacturers. And we're asking them, hey, of all these news items, which ones do you think are most interesting to our community, to our ecosystem? They're weighing in on it, and then we're unpacking it in a way that I think only somebody embedded in the industry can. Talking about how does the rubber meet the road? What do these news items mean for those who are trying to bring new medical technologies to market? Those might be developers, they might be startups, they might be inventors, they might be investors, they might be clinicians. Whatever they are, we think these news items are going to hit really close to home and cut through a lot of the noise that you see out there on the standard news channels. In addition to that, we're always going to be talking with cool guests, doing series, doing FDA education. We're going to try to do a better job in the future of indexing those so that you can find them more easily. Because after 122 shows, it can be really hard to find anything. So that's why I'm excited today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We're going to take you right to our first item of the day, and that is upcoming events. We will update this every week. It's quite a long list starting on October 4th. Now you heard about MISH-Bio's Medical Device Summit that happened back on September 20th. But coming up next on the 4th is the Michigan Forum for Digital Health. You can scan that QR code with your smartphone very quickly to get to their registration page. This is a half-day event on October 4th. I just jotted down some of the notable organizations that are going to be there speaking, a representative from Health and Human Services, someone from HAP, Health Alliance Plan, the Henry Ford Health System, Trinity Health, Cerner, the folks who make the patient records database, and their keynote from Microsoft from their healthcare division. So we plan to be there, actually Into Being sponsoring that. We are looking forward to seeing you there for that half-day virtual event on October 4th. Coming up after that on October 11th. This one's interesting. This is the FDA Nano Day Symposium. Now, this is focused on drug products. And you say, well, you're usually talking about devices and related products. But number one, MedTech isn't only devices. There's drugs, there's combination products, there's biologics. And while this is focused on the use of nanotechnology in drug products, I know in our business we've encountered uses of nanotechnology in medical devices. And here's the problem. While it sounds really, really cool, oh, we're using nanotechnology, the use of small particles actually has unexpected consequences for both the human body and for the environment. So that's why this is worth focusing on. So FDA is going to spend a day on October 11th talking about the use of nanotechnology in drug products. And I think they're going to be talking about biological products as well that contain nanomaterials. So if you've ever thought, oh, we have a product and it's going to be nanotechnology, better go to this one on October 11th. Then on October 12th at Ford Field, and Jeff Reinfeldt's been on the show before to remind us of this, the Renaissance Fall 2022 Undemo Day. Scan the QR code. It's past the registration now for startups, but you can go as a member of the public. It's free to attend. What a great place to do some in-person, real, live, humans, flesh-to-flesh networking. Then on October 13th, thanks to our friend Ken Spencer and also to, I believe it was Lisa Johnson who reached out to remind us of this, Celebrate Invention 2022. This has always been a hallmark event for the local community in the state of Michigan, now put together by Innovation Partnerships. It is part of the A2 Tech 360 week that is happening. But as usual, it's going to be on campus. It's going to be at the Michigan Union on the second floor at the University of Michigan. It's free and open to the public. If you'd like to come see new University of Michigan innovations and startups, you can come there. And they've always got great food, great event there to come to. Scan the QR code for more information. Then October 19th through 20th, jumping all the way to the West Coast, it is time for Device Talks West, and that's one of those co-hosted gigantic conferences. It'll be in Santa Clara at the Santa Clara Convention Center, October 19th and 20th, but that's the next big MedTech thing happening. After that, on October 24th through 26th, it's the MedTech conference, they say powered by AdvaMed. This is actually an amazing conference. I won't even try to detail everything that's happening there. But AdvaMed, obviously, medical device advocacy, lots of lobbying efforts and stuff. The commissioner for the FDA, Robert Califf, will be at this event in Boston, Massachusetts. It's usually a very, very well-attended event. Hope to be there. I know our friends at MishBio are going there. Stephen had mentioned to me that if you're a MishBio member, you can probably get a discount on attending that as well. Coming up then, very quickly, I don't even think you can attend all of these events coming up in October. So pick your poison. October 25th through 27th. This is going to sound new. For many of you in the ecosystem, you may not have heard of this, but I'm telling you, you actually kind of have. Coming up October 25th through 27th, the AI Summit in Columbus, Ohio, if you're into machine learning and artificial intelligence, might be an interesting one to go to. Never heard of the group that's putting this together, and I'm sorry I didn't have it up there. I'll have it up there next week. It's a new sounding group. This appears to be the reincarnation of what used to be the Xavier Health conferences. Those were, if you remember, wonderful conferences bringing the health tech ecosystem together, often attended by high folks at the FDA. And we are hoping that these summits that are being put together are in fact going to pick up where the Xavier conferences left off. So October 25th through 27th for artificial intelligence. We'll come to another one of those in just a second, but first, on the 27th also, if you're into regenerative medicine, not replacing body parts, but regrowing body parts, we think that's pretty cool. October 27th, 11 a.m., Natural History Studies to Support Regenerative Medicine, a how-to webinar. FDA is bringing together folks in innovation, patients, and others, asking the question, how should we do studies of regenerative medicine looking over time at outcomes? Because this isn't a implant a new hip and look at it a week later. This is a very ongoing process looking at a very biological process. And so they want to hear from you. They want to hear from industry. That sounds like a fun one to go to. Then November 1st, coming right back here to Michigan, coming right back to Ford Field. This one's going to be big. The MedHealth Summit, November 1st, Ford Field in Detroit. Scan the QR code. Come on, join us there. It's actually going to be really, really fun. MedTech Crossroads is going to be doing something that we've never done before. In addition to Into Being in attendance, MedTech Crossroads is going to be broadcasting live that Tuesday from Ford Field in partnership with the Healthcare Wraps podcast. We're going to set up a broadcasting booth. We're going to have some of the speakers come on and talk about what they've been talking about down on the floor, as well as some color from the show. So looking forward to the MedHealth Summit, Hall of Legends at Ford Field. If you're in healthcare innovation ecosystem, Michigan, Ontario, beyond, this is a cross-border initiative. Come on and join us at Ford Field on the 1st. So it should be good. If you got questions, you can also email hello@medhealthinnovation.org. And then November 2nd and 3rd, the Medical Device and Manufacturing Minneapolis Trade Show. If you recall, this summer we were out along with the folks from MEDC and a bunch of Michigan companies at MD&M Anaheim. Well, there's a few different medical device and manufacturing trade shows, and MD&M Minneapolis is the next one coming up on the 2nd and 3rd. So be sure, if you're really into it and you're looking for providers mostly, who's going to make that subcomponent for me? What an amazing place to be. November 7th and 8th. This one's interesting. Stay with me on this one. The FDA is doing joint public workshops, 2 of them, one on the 7th, one on the 8th, for medical devices for opioid use. Now, they're not talking about syringes to inject opioids. That's not what they're talking about. They're looking at diagnosis and treatment of opioid abuse, which, as we know, is a gigantic problem in this country. And so they're kind of asking the question, how do we use devices to look at this? And how do we use them for diagnosis, for treatment, and more? Scan that QR code if you want to know more, but if your business is in the world of diagnostics, and if you've ever thought about how it relates to the world of opioids, this would be an important place to be for you. And then November 7th through 9th, going back to Columbus, Ohio, we have this next conference, the Combination Products Summit. Now, what we haven't seen out of this new group is a summit that is as broad as the old Xavier conferences were. But that being said, they're really touching on some important points here. The Collaborative AI Summit and the Combination Products Summit. These are being put on by, I got the name here, the Healthcare Products Collaborative. It's known as the AFDO and RAPS, Healthcare Products Collaborative, put on by those 2 organizations. And while they're not going as broad and generic as some of the previous Xavier conferences that were held, it turns out that they're touching some really important topics. So in this case, combination products, combination drug and device products. And as you know, those have to be regulated by multiple divisions at FDA. It's an entire process just to find out which division is going to be your lead on a combination product. So if you have any inkling that you're involved in a combination product, might be a good place to go to learn more. The drawback, it's not generic, but the benefit is if that's really the topic you're looking for, you're not going to get diluted with other topics. If you want to talk about combination products, you're not going to get diluted with software or something else. And then finally, for today on December 6th, the FDA Broad Agency Announcement Day. I think this is something that's important for more in our ecosystem to get involved with. The FDA funds extramural research, things outside of the agency, through broad agency announcements. Now, whereas NIH or others are focused on maybe funding you to do product development, a new medical device, for example, the FDA is interested in regulatory science. How do we get things cleared better, faster, more safely, more effectively? And if you have interest in these kinds of things, FDA says this BAA is open, quote, to all responsible sources. So you don't have to be a particular government agency or anything like that. You're able to go out there pretty much as anything, an individual, a startup, and you can hear what they have to say and possibly submit your ideas for how you would like to apply for those BAAs. Also, I just want to have you not forget, and we didn't get the slide completely finished here, but the A2 Biosocial continuing to happen in BioArbor here in our local ecosystem. Wonderful events. We'll tell you more about those in upcoming weeks. Well, now it's time for FDA and industry news, both from our local ecosystem here in Michigan and also the national ecosystem. And starting with this kind of sobering news, Sparrow Health laying off hundreds, quote, as losses mount in the industry, this from Crane's Detroit Business. They're reporting a $90 million loss in January through June of 2022. Beaumont actually had a $100 million loss in the same period. Didn't do as badly because they had a broader, more diverse business that seemed to have supported them better. But if you'd like to read more about this, along with a American Hospital Association report in this article, you can scan that QR code and go to Crane's to take a look at it. Next up, from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. This is how you know you're way too deep in the industry, folks, when this headline excites you. Your clinical decision support software, is it a medical device? Now, many of you are involved in software projects and you think to yourself, I don't want to be a diagnostic. I don't know how many times at Into Being we've heard folks come to us and say, yeah, we know, it's hard to be a diagnostic. We don't want to claim diagnosis of a disease state or condition. We're happy being an add-on. We're happy being something that would be clinical decision support software. So the industry is learning to say this now. Yeah, we're not going to be a diagnostic. Well, FDA has been spending some time thinking about it, and if you'd like to read what they have to say, scan that QR code. But they actually were nice enough to create a graphic of this, and we'll do our best to zoom in on this. It's quite a complex graphic as we unpack it. But it's an entire flowchart for your clinical decision support software. Is it a medical device? Now, as you're aware, software can be a medical device just as much as a piece of hardware. We call it SAMD, or software as a medical device. And in general, it's subject to the same kinds of regulatory oversight as a hardware device. If it's diagnosing or treating a disease state or condition and it has an intended use that fits into a category or aligns with the kinds of things that FDA regulates, it's going to be regulated like a medical device. And so many times folks say, oh, I've got this piece of software and it's going to help so much. But when is it a medical device? And when is it just a tool to support physicians? Well, now we've got a little bit of clarity on this. We'll actually go to the next slide, which is just that middle row out of the table. This is the table back here. This is the graphic. If you go to that QR code back on this page, you can get to this graphic. But if we zoom in, zoom into here. Let's go right here. The following 4 things have to be true. And it's going to be the first one of these that's going to disappoint many software companies. For it to be true that your software function may be a non-device clinical decision support software. That would be great news. For that to be true, you're going to have to pass these hurdles. First of all, your software function does not acquire, process, or analyze medical images, signals, or patterns. Right there, a lot of folks are going to drop right off the train. Because the reality is many times people will be processing data coming right off of a medical device. They will be acquiring images. They will be acquiring patient-specific things that amount to medical images, signals, or patterns. Really, the only way around this from what we read, and please take a look or consult on your specific application, is that if the thing that's coming into your clinical decision support software is the kind of thing that one physician might say to another physician, or perhaps it's the output of a report, the patient has condition X with nuance A, B, and C, well, then it might be eligible for clinical decision support software. If you're taking raw data off of an imaging device or an EKG lead or something else like that, you're very quickly going to fall outside of this category. But let's presume that what you're talking about is like patient information, like a physician says, I diagnosed this state. If your software takes that state in, something that can be easily understood, doesn't require custom diagnosis beyond what is stated there, and then perhaps compares it to data that, or to decision making that is widely accepted in the industry. So, number 1, does not acquire these things. Number 2, it just displays, analyzes, or prints medical information normally communicated between healthcare professionals. Then we get to 3. Your software function provides recommendations to a healthcare professional rather than providing a specific output or directive. So we're all familiar with how you wouldn't want to put a diagnosis out of your software, or you will probably qualify as a diagnostic. But if all you're doing is taking in information of the sort that can be communicated between healthcare professionals, processing that, and providing a recommendation rather than a specific diagnosis or number or readout, and your software function provides the basis of the recommendations so that it's not the only thing the healthcare professional relies on, then your software function may be non-device decision support software, clinical decision support. Now, to some of you, this is going to be disappointing because what it really means is if you've already got data and you feed it into a piece of software and the software simply says, yep, based on what you fed me, here are the things that you might want to do next, well, then we're talking. But if you've got a sensor, you've got an imager, you're gathering data and you're helping to diagnose, it's going to move you out of the category of clinical decision support software. But at least we have clarity from the agency. And in fact, there is a guidance document. You can get to that through this QR code, Clinical Decision Support Software Guidance for Industry. And that is all of the details that you may want to know right under the hood, right there. That brings us to something we've talked about before on this show, but it is now final. the Software Pre-Certification Pilot Program. FDA set out, and they wanted to find out. Now, of course, they can't change the laws. That's for Congress to do. They wanted to find out if they could rely on pre-certification of companies. How do you do your software development? And if we could analyze how a company does its software development, we could get an assurance that they knew how to do it and that the software was going to be quality software. Then we wouldn't have to look as hard at clearance time to find out if we're going to clear the product. After all, software can change. So you end up clearing a piece of software and down the road you may want to change it. And the traditional methods for changing medical devices can be very onerous, and that's usually a good thing. But the FDA is exploring, could we give people the freedom, the inherent freedom that software allows, and regulate this in a different way? Could we observe this in a different way? Could we examine this in a different way? And so that's what this software pre-certification pilot program was. The pilot program is now considered closed, but you can read this final report by scanning the QR code. Here's what FDA said in this report. We're going to go through some select parts. Software as a medical device is increasingly being adopted throughout the healthcare sector. These devices are developed and validated differently than traditional hardware-based medical devices, and that they are developed and designed iteratively and can be designed to be updated after deployment to quickly make enhancements and efficiently address issues, including malfunctions and adverse events. You think? I mean, that's kind of the beauty of software, right? You can write it and write this part and that part, and as long as it all comes together in the end, verification can be very straightforward. You can write these tests, you can run them all on your software package in a matter of hours, if not minutes. So it can be very easy to do certain things with software. But the traditional regulatory frameworks for clearing it don't look at it that way. We're used to verification and validation taking a very long time. We're used to things being frozen and being very, very hard to change. So FDA was exploring this, and they said this: while the pilot, this pre-cert pilot, enabled FDA to explore innovative techniques and approaches to regulatory oversight with stakeholders, FDA encountered challenges with implementing the proposed approach under our current statutory authorities. So what they're saying is this is a great body of research to do. Would pre-cert work? They actually had a hard time studying it because they were subject to current statutory authorities. That wasn't all for naught. But here's an example. FDA could not require the pilot participants to provide information under the pilot that was not otherwise already required under existing statute. So the funny thing is when you make a clinical trial, you can run multiple arms of the trial. But FDA doesn't have the authority to unregulate one arm of a trial when it comes to their regulatory methods. That means they had to put their actual subjects through both the de novo process, which they were using, as well as asking them, with no authority, for additional information. Not a lot of people want to give additional information when they're already subject to the de novo process. But good for them, the 9 pilot participants nonetheless engaged voluntarily and provided significant additional information to support the pilot. Although it was challenging to harmonize this information across pilot participants to develop consistent, repeatable methodologies. So they really had not anywhere near as much data out of this as they would have liked. And this is where they ended up. Given the challenges faced during the pilot, the FDA has determined that the approach described in their working model, it's not practical to implement under our current statutory and regulatory authorities. I think they're optimistic that if they could change those authorities, if Congress would grant them new freedoms, then they could do some pretty cool stuff. But right now, that's not forthcoming. Now, it wasn't for naught, like we said. Testing the program, they did internal retrospective tests. So what does that mean? They had companies that had been cleared through software as a medical device pathways. They had previously reviewed them. They used those sort of as a control arm of their test. And then they prospectively looked at these 9 companies who were going through the de novo process and additionally asked them to submit a mock package that would accompany how you would do a pre-cert model. So they were able to look and say, could we have come to the same conclusions more efficiently if we'd done it a different way? And it's a really neat question to be asking. But here's the upshot. FDA says, the faster cycles of innovation and the speed of change for medical device software would benefit from a new regulatory approach. The challenges faced in completing the test plan for the pilot under FDA's current authorities underscore the potential benefits of moving beyond, get this, I love how they say this, the same medical device legal framework that FDA has operated under since 1976. So the agency's kind of throwing up their hands and saying, you, Congress, you haven't given us any new abilities or freedoms or regulations since 1976. It's nearly 50 years. So this is a call. Technology has changed. It's time for new regulations that would enable new ways of getting products to market, much like software companies do today in almost every other industry. So it's really a call to Congress, but here's the question. Is there any appetite to make statutory changes? Is there any pathway to make statutory changes? These are very interesting questions and ones that I think we're going to try to talk about on the show upcoming, because this was really out of FDA's hands. Industry can call for easier ways to get products to market. Consumers can call for better healthcare products. What FDA is showing through this pre-cert pilot program is that it's now up to Congress. If Congress wants to give people what they want, they're going to have to do it. It's out of the FDA's hands, and it's something that Congress is going to have to act on. That brings us to our next news item. Did you know that there's a catalog of regulatory science tools out there? What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about that here in a second. But if you want to go to the page at the FDA website, click on that QR code and you can get there. Here's FDA's description, and then we'll talk about it for a minute. The catalog of regulatory science tools provides a peer-reviewed resource for companies to use where standards do not yet exist. These tools expand the scope of innovative science-based approaches to help improve the development and assessment of emerging medical technologies. They've provided a reference for each tool, but this is important. These tools do not replace FDA-recognized standards or qualified medical device development tools. So, if you've listened to this show for very long, you know that a company is responsible to meet FDA requirements, but FDA requirements are often vague and general. Oftentimes those FDA requirements involve the implementation of design controls. If you don't know about design controls, you can watch prior episodes of MedTech Crossroads where you will learn about those. But as a part of that, as you're going through and saying, what does this device have to do? Quickly you'll discover that not every question is a new question. Not every requirement is a new requirement. Many things have been done before. If you're working in catheters, you're going to find that people have been making catheters for a long time. If you're working in radiology, you'll discover that there's many things that have been done before. And as we move forward as an industry, these things get captured, solidified, refined, and embodied in consensus standards. Usually these are international standards that are developed by standards bodies. We've talked about these on previous shows, IEC, ISO, and others. And these standards provide, get it, standardized ways of developing and testing and documenting and labeling the kinds of things in the subcategory that you find yourself in. FDA goes further, and they consensus standards. They recognize harmonized standards. They say, not only is this an international standard, but we will recognize it here in the United States. Well, that's great, because standards then give you a really definitive way to answer a lot of questions about your product. There are also these qualified medical device development tools. There's things that the agency recognizes. But in between those worlds of recognized standards and just trying to prove something all on your own, what exists in between those? And it's these regulatory science tools that really come into play. The FDA is not saying that this is standardized. They are not saying do this and your device will be cleared by any means. But they are saying we recognize that this group over here or this group over here is doing good thinking about this very, very specific problem. You might want to think about it the way that they're thinking about it. So here's how those types of tools are used. If you're considering using a tool from this catalog, and I'll take you through 3 or 4 of them here in a second, note that these tools have not been qualified as medical device development tools. The FDA has not evaluated the suitability of these tools within any specific context of use. But you can submit in the context of a pre-sub to the agency to find out if they think one of these tools might be appropriate. So this is giving you a little leg up on some things that FDA maybe hasn't fully recognized, but is thinking hard about. And they would be a very natural part of a conversation as a part of a pre-submission with the agency. So for example, here's one. It's a benchmark data set for validating computational fluid dynamics simulations of blood flow through generalized medical device geometries. If you're going to have blood flowing through complex geometries in medical devices, maybe you'd want to see what this research was about, because FDA might want to know, did you check this? You can't, maybe we're not going to ask you to do a gigantic study that's actually live, but maybe they'd be interested in modeling some of these outcomes. Here's an in vitro blood flow loop system for evaluating the thrombogenicity of medical devices and biomaterials. Thrombogenicity, very big focus. Well, there seems to be a, not yet standardized, but working on it, system out there for looking at that question. If I'm working with blood, would I be interested in knowing about that? Probably. Electrophysiological models, electrophysiological models. Benchmark problems. What does this mean? Unpack that a minute. It turns out that they are offering these benchmark problems up that they say have known exact solutions. So that if you're doing calculations on cardiac electrophysiology, you can use these as a control in your algorithm. I think that's pretty cool, because FDA is saying there's ways that people have given controls to the industry. Now you can check your algorithm against that. How much easier is that going to make it when you go to try to clear that device? To me, this seems like a really good thing. Hopefully you'll think so too. Electrophysiological biomarkers of brain injury. If you're involved in TBI, traumatic brain injury, FDA is looking at these electrophysiological biomarkers of brain injury and saying, hey, people have been looking at this. We think this might have relevance for future clearances. So it's really an open invitation to enter into this dialogue. And when you have your pre-submission with the agency, you might want to reference some of these. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of these tools at the link we showed you earlier. In a future show, if there's interest, we might dive into some of them. But wanted to let you know about these because they're very, very interesting tools. And it's good to see the agency recognizing such things. Well, and that brings us to our last news item. This one I found just really cool. FDA and Veterans Health Administration are collaborating to help accelerate medical device innovation for advancement of care. First of all, I was not personally aware, even though we have worked on devices that are intended for military use and intended for veterans. I was actually not aware that there is a Veterans Affairs Innovation Institute in Seattle, Washington. And it turns out what is about to happen is FDA is announcing, that's the Veterans Affairs Innovation Institute, FDA is announcing that they are going to co-locate 12 FDA staff at this Veterans Affairs Innovation Institute in Seattle to cross-pollinate. They want to know more about what's happening on the ground with veterans and innovation, and this is going to allow the VA to have direct access to FDA. If that seems like, well, they're all part of the government, they should talk together, you've never worked with the government before. One of the big problems that we have in working with government agencies is that many of the agencies can't or don't or won't talk to each other. And so the fact that the FDA is reaching out with the VA, doing some co-location, promises to bode well. It may not be this year or next year, but it promises to bode well for the future of innovation for military and for veterans. So we thought that was a cool news item. There's many more that we didn't touch. In future weeks, as the news rolls through the door, we will continue to curate it. We'll look and see what's interesting to our team here. And if there's not a lot of news that came through the door, we'll pick up on ones that we weren't able to share this week. There's an awful lot that we didn't share. But these were the ones that really we found to be highlighted. We'll pause right there and see if there's any questions from the audience on any of the upcoming events, on any of the news items. Maybe there's a news item or upcoming event that you have heard of and you would like to let the folks know. You'd be welcome to do that as well. So we would look for hands in the Zoom room if you're watching on Zoom. Some are watching live on YouTube, which is a new option recently. You can watch on the live stream on YouTube as well. And the link going out every week in our email allows you to get to either of those options. Let me tell you really briefly what's coming up next on MedTech Crossroads. For the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time. Like we said, every week we're going to talk about events. We're going to talk about new FDA and industry news items. We're also going to be indexing, transcribing, and reposting older episodes. We've heard from a number of you that you like to be able to get back to old episodes. Some mentors in the community are using these episodes almost as assigned watching for their mentees. That's how useful some of these episodes have been to people. But in some sense, we've been remiss because we haven't made those episodes as findable as they should be. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing in upcoming days. Even as we think about new series, new guests, we'll be bringing you the news every week. We'll be bringing you the events every week. And we'll be trying to index those better so that as new series and new topics make their way out, you'll be able to find them and share them. Well, that's it for today on MedTech Crossroads. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for being with us. Have a great week.